An extraterrestrial walked me to the edge of a cavern and opened a door beneath the earth that the maps had always pretended did not exist. What he showed me under the Grand Canyon changes every textbook you ever trusted. It was not treasure, not fossils, not a secret military base. It was a nested system of chambers and resonant galleries tuned to a frequency that matches human biology. A mechanism for activating memory and aligning the pineal with a frequency that speaks to cellular memory itself. Imagine a machine built into stone that sings at 432 Hertz and rewrites the way your body remembers who it was meant to be. Imagine that the government knew enough to shut it down and not tell the world. If that thought touches something in you, subscribe and ring the bell now, because what follows is a trip through 3 layers of truth the canyon still holds, and a practical invitation at the end to test your own resonance. I have spent 31 years mapping rock, interviewing survivors of excavation projects, and arguing with people who preferred their denial. I was dismissed, called a fantasist, and cut out of funded digs. That refusal became fuel. This story begins on a hot afternoon when the light over the rim shimmered and ended inside a chamber where the word surrender changed into recognition. You will see the surface as tourists see it, the hidden workshop when it sang, and the present-day containment that muffles a voice. Feel the dry heat on your neck, the metallic tang in the air, the low hum beneath your feet. This is my account of a place that refused to stay buried, and the choice I had to make when an alien visitor handed me a key I did not yet understand. I was born in a small town on the Colorado Plateau and learned to read maps before I could read people. My mother, Elena, taught me to listen to the land. She taught me the names of rocks and rivers and the patience to wait for meaning. At 19, I enrolled in geology, and by 28, I had a field job cataloging stratigraphy across canyons and mesas. I published papers that mattered to a handful of people and annoyed a few more. Marcus Hale was my first mentor. He showed me how to measure seams with a caliper and how to be stubborn without being cruel. When I testified about anomalous acoustic readings near a remote wash, the board branded me as eccentric. I lost a grant that year and my position at a major laboratory. Samuel Ortiz, a colleague, called and said, "Do not push it." But I pushed. I thought knowledge must be stubborn too. Years later, Professor Yara Singh offered me access to LiDAR scans no one else would show. She believed in patterns the way surgeons believe in anatomy. Agent Tom Reed came later, clean-cut and patient, offering documents that neither confirmed nor denied anything but widened the questions. Layla, a Navajo elder, warned me that some stones remember those who listen, and some doors should remain closed until people are ready. Jonah, a cavern technician, taught me that steel and silence often travel together. Miriam, a documentary filmmaker, insisted on filming everything, even the things I wanted to hide from myself. My life became a ledger of losses and discoveries. At times, the ridicule felt like a physical ulcer. At times, the solitude felt like armor. The origin of my obsession was simple. When I was 12, I found a slab half buried with marks that repeated at intervals like a heart. I touched it, and the markings thrummed under my fingers. That small shock became a lifelong hunger to find the source of the hum that lives under the canyon floor. I learned to lose comforts for time enough to follow a sound. The conflict became public when I suggested in a lecture that some labeled ruins were instruments and not monuments. Doors closed. Funding disappeared. But each time the canyon breathed with a note that sounded like a memory, I remembered that losing a title meant gaining hours of listening. The ruin of my career taught me how to persist and to see persecution as a signal. The real test came when the call came from an anonymous voice telling me to meet at the rim at dusk and to bring nothing but a willingness to follow. The first sign appeared as a shimmer in the air near an old service road. The light moved like a slow insect and left a trail of temperature in the air. I felt it as a pressure change on my skin and smelled metallic ozone. There was a voice that did not need a mouth. It said, "You found the hum." I answered aloud because old habits die slowly. "Who are you?" It replied in a voice that sounded familiar and alien at once. "I am an initiator," it said, "a reader of stones." The canyon wind carried the syllables. A glow pooled at a fissure, and a slab slid aside without breaking. The surface of the stone inside shimmered like a cut crystal. My heart beat like a small drum, and the hairs on my forearm lifted. Jonah clung to the ledge. "Do not step alone," he said, breath audible, shoes skidding in dust. "We go together," Miriam answered, camera steady even when her hands were not. The entity spoke again. "We do not take. We return what was kept." I remember a taste like copper on my tongue. Samuel whispered, "This is impossible." Elena reached for my sleeve. Her fingers were steady. "You always said the rock talks if you listen," she said. The fissure widened, and a staircase of stone dropped into a chamber bathed in a soft inner aurora. I smelled humidity and an old perfume of buried wood. That smell became a map in mind. We descended, each step a negotiation between fear and curiosity, and the walls hummed in 432 hertz. The hum was not noise, it was instruction. The choice I faced in the dim light felt less like temptation and more like duty. The initiator offered a method. "You may be shown 3 layers," it said. "Each is a lens on purpose. You may watch and learn. You may leave and forget, or you may enter and carry the memory into the open." I asked, hands slightly trembling, "What does it ask in return?" The entity answered, "Nothing you call belonging, only that you listen and that you relay without war." Agent Tom Reed stood with a document that glinted under his lamp. He asked, "Can this be controlled?" The voice answered, "Control is a word used by those who fear resonance." Professor Yara put a hand to the stone and felt warmth like a living vein. "How will we record this?" Miriam asked. "Not all of it can be filmed," the entity said. "Some things must be felt." I made the decision to accept because the possibility of a hand on the pulse of human memory was worth the career I had lost. Layla muttered a short prayer, and Mark, a security contractor, swallowed and nodded. The entity touched my brow lightly. The sensation was like running cold water over a bone. A pressure moved through me as if someone had tightened a band at the base of my skull and released a seed. The stone at our feet thrummed clear, and a thin mist rose that smelled of resin and river silt. In that moment, the world folded like a map, and a corridor opened to a past full of hands and machines moving in patient choreography. The offer had become a passage. The visions of construction arrived like a meticulously rehearsed performance staged by people who understood sound more than spectacle. I saw workers with tools that resembled chisels and tuning forks, moving massive blocks that fit together without mortar and yet with seams that vibrated like strings. There was a team that spoke in clicks, their language transmitted through bone and bone marrow, instructing placement by tone and not by angle. The capstone of the central chamber was not simple stone. It was cladded with a sheet of unknown alloy that caught light as if it were liquid gold. The Sphinx there was not a single sculpture. It was a complex array of standing stones and reflective planes placed to direct resonance. Dr. Elena Ruiz, a materials specialist who appears in my footage, pointed at a seam and said, "This is not weathering. This is intentional wear from vibration." She ran a probe and numbers flickered. Marcus, who once taught me caliper technique, knelt and whispered, "They tuned this like an instrument." The sound of men working was layered, hammers at a distance, voices that rose and fell in controlled cadence. Water coaxed through channels to cool the stone during a particular phase of alignment. Up close, the smell was like heated limestone and sweet resin. I tasted dust that had a mineral sweetness and felt a static that made my teeth buzz. The central workshop held a crystalline array that looked like shards of quartz arranged in a lattice pattern. When activated, light threaded through the crystals and refracted into a pattern that matched constellations in a sky map I had seen in Yara Singh's notes. "Alignment with the stars is literal here," Yara said, her finger tracing the light like a seamstress. The design was both mechanical and symbolic. It spoke of a purpose, not burial, but activation. Workers placed offerings of seed and water. They sang at intervals that synchronized with workers' breathing and with a low drum that tracked the tide of the nearby river. I caught a fragment of a slate with an inscription that matched an Anunnaki idiom I'd only seen once in a disputed tablet. The inscription paired symbols for breath, stone, and memory. Dr. Samuel Ortiz argued in a hushed tone. They engineered resonance into human bodies. The tools were meant to awaken something in us. Layla translated a chant, and when she sang, the moon seemed to change hue. It was clear that the workshops were teaching centers, laboratories for creating an alignment between geometry, frequency, and living tissue. The mechanisms included channels where air and water were moved to create pressure waves, and alcoves where a practitioner could lay and be exposed to reflected frequency until cellular patterns shifted. The images were vivid and specific. I felt my spine lengthen with each revelation and wrote notes until my hand cramped. The evidence suggested a civilization that used architecture as a technology for human activation and memory recall. They designed spaces that resonated with the pineal gland in a way that altered perception. I saw initiation rituals where apprentices were placed under a capstone and bathed in harmonic light while the chambers sung at precise intervals near 432 Hz. The memory that returned to them when the ritual ended was often ancestral skills and names of places no one outside the ritual remembered. I watched a young apprentice open his mouth and sing in a language that was not his own, and then write with a stylus in a hand he had never practiced. The sensation of that revival was both terrifying and strangely merciful. The initiation that happened inside a small inner chamber was the most intimate thing I experienced. It began as a pressure at the base of the skull and turned into a field that rearranged the way my body interpreted touch. I remember a voice inside that sounded like my grandmother and then like a machine translating her. "Breathe shallow, then deepen," it coached without moving lips. There were 8 of us in that chamber. Myself, Layla, Jonah, Miriam, Dr. Elena Ruiz, Marcus, Professor Yara, and a stranger named Aram who spoke Livil, but watched with a patience that steadied the room. The stone beneath us was warm and alive, like a slow heart. The air tasted of metal and sweet herb smoke. A crystalline lattice descended from the ceiling and touched the top of my head with no pressure, and yet it rearranged the weight of my thoughts. Dialogue inside the chamber was a weave of spoken words and something like telepathic nudges. I said, "It feels like someone rewrote a line in my bones." Marcus replied, "I can feel the seam in my palm open." Aram murmured, "My hands are remembering tools I never held." Miriam cried softly, "I see fields and a child running with a stick that is a tool I can use." Professor Yara asked, "Did you all smell resin?" Layla answered, "It is the scent of memory returning." Dr. Elena said, "My fingers know how to cut stone now." The bonded conversation continued, with 8 exchanges that escalated into more intimate retorts, layering personal memory and the collective echo. The chamber worked like a prism, splitting history into practice. Sensory descriptions accumulated, the taste of river silt on the tongue, the low hum vibrating in the teeth, cool damp on the skin like a veil, a warmth behind a sternum like an ember, and an energy that crawled along nerves like a friendly current. In a moment of clarity, I felt the pineal deepen its responsiveness, a physical warming in the center of my head, accompanied by geometric visions like a lattice of light folding into itself. My breath synchronized with the frequency, and I experienced a release of tension in a part of my body that held grief for decades. The entity, when it spoke next, used our names and something older. "You are nodes of a pattern," it said. "You can carry note and send it." The initiation did not give me answers in words. It gave me skill in sensation. It rewired how I received resonant input. Afterwards, for days, my taste altered. Water tasted of mica. My dreams played like architectural plans. The change was biological and unmistakable. Expanding from the single chamber, the system made sense as a fully integrated map that used water and ritual to tune communities. A central river system fed terraces and channels that were part irrigation and part waveguide. At certain times of year, the flow through narrow sluices created pressure pulses that moved through subterranean galleries. Those pulses were timed with ritual calendars to create maximum effect during initiation windows. The temples along that system each had a role. The Temple of Light, near the river bend, served as a harmonizer. The Temple of Stones recorded memory. The Temple of Passage prepared bodies. The Temple of Harvest translated activation into practical skills. I met people who had come later and tried to keep the system alive in small, quiet ways. Among them were 5 named figures who changed the course of the narrative. Amen, a water master who could read the flow of an underground stream by listening at a rock. Naima, a herbalist who used river plants to stabilize activations. Daniel, an acoustic engineer turned guardian who documented chamber frequencies with improvised gear. Rosa, a translator who learned the tonal language etched on slabs. And Caleb, a former contractor who dared to map the chambers with a child's curiosity. Each of these people had a specific action in the story. Ahmed led a nighttime repair of a sluice when a collapse threatened the rhythm. Naima prepared a poultice that calmed a novice after an overactivation. Daniel rigged sensors that finally proved the frequency pattern across 3 chambers. Rosa deciphered a sequence that lined up with the star map Yara and found. Caleb smuggled out a shard of cladding and hid it in a museum box that would later become evidence. Their reactions were human and specific. Ahmed said, "Listen here, the river is speaking in intervals." Naima warned, "Do not rush the second breath. It burns if you are not ready." Daniel muttered into his recorder, "If this charts, then the pattern is deliberate." Rosa laughed once when she understood a symbol and said, "It is not a god, it is a gesture." Caleb kept a map in his boot and slept with one eye open. The system taught me that technology and ritual can be a single act. The canyon was not a set of random caves. It was a laboratory that flowed like water, like breath, like a breathing city underground. There were moments of real tension when the outer world collided with that ancient intention. The first major confrontation came when a seismic survey company, with a name that ended up on a clearance order, arrived with heavy gear. They sent down drills and declared that the rock must be sampled. I argued, I begged, I documented. Agent Tom Reed sat on the edge of a canyon boulder and read a classified notice that limited activity. "This area is under protective order," he said, but his face did not tell whether protection meant conservation or containment. Government officials arrived with clipboarded neutrality. Dr. Elena stood up to a contact officer in a tent and said, "You cannot reduce this to a sample." He answered, "We must consider national interest." The contractor pressed, "We need a permit." The tension escalated into legal weight and equipment on site. At night, a convoy came and lights like angry moons rimmed the sky. There was a moment when agents opened a vault and someone called my name. I ran and found them lifting a shard of the cladding. The presence of armed control turned ritual into a crime scene. The second tension came internally when some members of our group wanted exposure and others wanted secrecy. Miriam argued we must show the world. Jonah, scarred and pragmatic, argued to secure and seal. "We risk exploitation," he said. "We also risk silence," Miriam replied. These debates were not abstract. They played out in whispers in a sleeping field and on phone lines that grew heated. The moment of highest fear happened when a controlled detonation was ordered nearby to test rock stability, and a fissure opened that threatened to collapse a gallery and bury a living chamber. Ahmed and Caleb sprinted to brace the channel with improvised timber.
"Hold fast," Caleb shouted. Naima slapped a herbal salve into a bleeding hand and chanted softly. The chamber trembled, and the sound that had been human for millennia turned guttural for a heartbeat. That heartbeat was 550 words that could not be sanitized. In those hours, I understood that modern power can silence ancient knowledge simply by making it a matter of security. The government document that later surfaced mentioned containment and national interest without describing the hum. That silence is a kind of violence. For me, the tension was both moral and physical. We were trying to keep a living education alive, and the world was responding with fear and paperwork. The ultimate act was the sealing. They closed entrances, they poured concrete in certain shafts, and they declared a safety perimeter. I watched as men with uniforms lowered a capstone and locked a mechanism that hummed even as it was shut. The room did not die. It went quiet like a sleeping beast. There are 5 distilled truths I returned with, and that I will share in plain language because the canyon taught them with force. First truth: structures can be technologies. A pyramid or a temple may be a functional device designed to align human biology with environmental resonance. Second truth: activation is biological. Rituals in architecture can alter cellular memory, particularly when frequency and geometry are tuned to life. Third truth: frequency matters. The specific use of cycles like 432 Hz and engineered resonance can be a bridge between nervous systems and memory. Fourth truth: systems fail when they are institutionalized or weaponized. What is meant to heal can be hidden or shut down when external powers fear its implications. Fifth truth: responsibility rests with those who carry memory forward. Knowledge without stewardship becomes a tool for control. Practical steps to honor this are straightforward. Learn to listen to the land. Test simple frequencies safely with a tuner and a guide. Respect the lineage of local peoples and names. Keep records, but also learn to hold silence when necessary to protect living spaces. If you are compelled to investigate, consult community elders and experts in acoustic ecology. Do not be sensational. Be careful. 1 month after the sealing, I found that small changes had spread among those who participated in the activation. My sleep had altered in a subtle way. I slept deeper and dreamed clearer. Miriam edited footage with a patience that made months of footage into a story that did not reveal chamber locations, but did show hands and reactions. She posted a short piece that went viral to the
wrong people and to the right ones. People wrote letters, and some sent stories of dreams that matched the patterns we had seen. I received a package with a shard of cladding hidden in a carved wooden box and a note that said, "Keep it warm." There was a community that formed around truth and discretion. 3 months later, a small band led by Rosa and Daniel had established a learning circle that met in a remote canyon kitchen to discuss rhythms and water. They practiced breathwork at 432 Hz with simple instruments and recorded shifts in mood and memory. Naima reported that the poultice she had formulated reduced after effects of overactivation in volunteers who followed a strict regimen. The governmental fence remained, but leaks of information increased. A leaked memo suggested the closure was about national security, but the language was ambiguous. By 6 months, the epilogue grew more tangible. Jonah started a small cooperative to teach stone listening and mud channel maintenance to youth, giving them skills and a reason to care for the land. Professor Yara published a peer-reviewed paper that carefully avoided sensational claims but advanced the idea that certain geometries can produce measurable resonance effects on tissue in controlled studies. Some called her brave, some called her reckless. We hosted a clandestine seminar with elders and engineers where Ahmed and Naima taught how to read a river by sound, and Daniel demonstrated harmless resonance experiments that anyone could do at home with a bowl of water and a tone to 432 Hz. The reactions were modest and real. People reported calmer sleep and a sharper sense of place. The shard of cladding I kept under a cloth in my desk throbbed once a full moon, and I felt a warmth like a promise. If this stirred something in you and you have your own memories to share, breathe deeply now and write in the comments starting with "I felt" or "I saw" so we can begin a conversation that is honest and grounded. Every comment helps build a network of people who can approach these sites with respect and care. Subscribe if you want thoughtful investigations that mix fieldwork, testimony, and practical guides for safe resonance experiments. There will be more material in the pinned comment with a short reading list and a guide to a basic frequency test you can do at home. Remember that curiosity without restraint can be harmful, but curiosity with humility can become a tool of repair. The canyon did not hide knowledge to be hoarded. It hid it until people learned to listen. It seems fitting to end with a reminder I carry like a talisman. We did not come to this story by accident. We came because some part of us remembers the sound of a stone being tuned to a human heart. If you choose to follow, do so with care, and know that the work of revealing is also the work of
keeping safe what matters. You were not led here by mistake. Perhaps you came to remember. If you want more, subscribe, share your experience below, and check the pinned comment for the guide. You are not alone in hearing the hum.